Across the country, courts are trying at least to provide checks and balances against Donald's attempts to defy the law. Very big questions remain, however. For instance, will the corrupt, illegitimate supermajority of the Supreme Court continue to rubber stamp Donald's illegal, unconstitutional actions, which they have essentially said cannot be illegal or unconstitutional when he commits them? Will the time come when Donald continues to ignore court rulings without any consequences whatsoever? This week, Alan Foyer of the New York Times reported that, quote, a federal appeals court late Tuesday rejected Donald's attempt to use an 18th century wartime law to deport immigrants he has accused of belonging to a violent Venezuelan street gang. The decision by the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Fifth Circuit in New Orleans was the first time that federal appellate judges had weighed in on the substantive question of whether Donald had properly invoked the law, the Alien Enemies Act, as part of his aggressive deportation agenda. While the ruling by a divided three-judge panel of one of the most conservative courts in the country was a defeat for the administration, the issue was still likely to be heard by the Supreme Court, unquote. Judges Leslie Southwick and Irma Ramirez wrote that migrants who are here illegally are not the same as a, quote, armed organized force, unquote. This nullifies Donald's legal basis for invoking the wartime statute. The ruling prevents the administration from expelling Venezuelans currently detained and requires that any future removals have at least a week's advance notice. Donald had claimed that these Venezuelan migrants were members of the gang Tren de Aragua, but he failed to prove that assertion, mostly because he was lying about it. This legal setback comes days after a federal judge blocked Donald from deporting migrant Guatemalan children. CBS News has more details on that story.
The unaccompanied minors were already on planes. They were ready to take off from Texas when the federal judge issued her order on Sunday. The federal judge ruled the Trump administration could not send the children back to Guatemala unless they had a deportation order. The White House has not yet commented. How did this get blocked at the very last minute?
Well, the judge in this case, Chanel, said that she issued what she called an extraordinary order over the weekend because she was very concerned about the information and details that were provided by the lawyers and attorneys representing this group of Guatemalan children. The lawyers alleged that this was an effort by the Trump administration to circumvent and bypass normal immigration procedures to rapidly deport these children without a day in court. They said many of these unaccompanied children from Guatemala still had pending immigration court cases in the U.S. that had not been adjudicated by federal judges, and that the administration was still moving to send them to Guatemala. According to the lawyers, some of them also expressed fear that they could be harmed or otherwise victimized in Guatemala if returned there.
Also, in recent days, an appeals court ruled that many of Donald's tariffs are illegal, and a federal judge determined that his use of the National Guard in LA was unjustified. These are good developments, yes, but again, the courts are moving far too slowly to keep up with the myriad ways in which Donald and the Trump regime continue to violate the law on a daily basis. And then again, there are those instances in which Donald and his DOJ have ignored judges' orders altogether. So where does that leave us? That leaves us with a corrupt, illegitimate supermajority of the Supreme Court as the backstop here. And the question, again, which we cannot answer because the corrupt, illegitimate supermajority of the Supreme Court no longer stands for defending and protecting the Constitution, is what are they going to do about it? Are they going to reverse the damage they've done, essentially by making Donald Trump an imperial president? International relations between Donald and Venezuela continue to be strained for yet another reason. Yesterday, Donald announced on his failed social media platform that the U.S. military carried out a strike against a boat. In his post, Donald said, quote, earlier this morning, on my orders, U.S. military forces conducted a kinetic strike against positively identified Tren de Aragua narco-terrorists in the Southcom area of responsibility. TDA is a designated foreign terrorist organization operating under the control of Nicolas Maduro, responsible for mass murder, drug trafficking, sex trafficking, and acts of violence, etc., etc., etc. He ends the post. The strike resulted in 11 terrorists killed in action, unquote. Okay. First of all, he did not write that post. It is relatively well punctuated and grammatical. There are no weird misspellings or capitalizations. But what were we just told there? The strike resulted in 11 terrorists killed in action. What action exactly? Were they in the midst of attacking U.S. forces? Were there actually drugs on this boat? Were they actually terrorists? Were they actually gang members? We'll never know. Why? Because United States military blew it all up. That is not how any of this is supposed to work. The statement that was posted on Donald's account includes a detail that the vessel was, quote, heading to the United States, unquote. But according to Helene Cooper in a New York Times report on the attack, Secretary of State Marco Rubio told reporters, quote, the vessel's destination was probably Trinidad or another country in the Caribbean, unquote. So clearly, we have some inconsistency here. And also, if they were heading to the United States of America, was that a military action against us? 11 people on a boat? The Times adds that this whole incident is very unusual, which seems to me the wrong word to be using at this point. It is insane, quite frankly, because the U.S. is usually focused on seizing drugs and prosecuting smugglers, not killing all of them and destroying all of the alleged evidence in the process. Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth appeared on Fox to further Donald's version of the story. The segment also included footage of what appears to be a video of the strike itself. Take a look.
The president put that video of him eviscerating, blowing up that boat coming across with all of the drugs on board. And the president said on social, on Truth Social, let them be on notice to anybody bringing drugs to the U.S. Beware. So the president is sending a message to other cartels, right?
A very clear one. I can tell you that was definitely not artificial intelligence. I watched it live. We knew exactly who was in that boat. We knew exactly what they were doing, and we knew exactly who they represented. And that was Tren de Aragua, a narco-terrorist organization designated by the United States, trying to poison our country with illicit drugs. Last year, under the Biden administration, all 4 years, 100,000 Americans died from drug-related from drugs, from the use of drugs, many of which poured in from Central and South America through our southwest border. Now, we're sealing the border, but President Trump is willing to go on offense in ways that others have not been. And to send that clear signal to Tren de Aragua, Cartel del Sols, and others emanating from Venezuela, we're not going to allow this kind of activity. You're poisoning our people. We've got incredible assets, and they are gathering in the region. And so you want to try to traffic drugs? It's a new day. It's a different day. And so those 11 drug traffickers are no longer with us.
You know who exactly was in that boat. You know exactly what was in that boat. Prove it, because we have no reason to believe anything that comes out of the mouth of Pete Hegseth, Donald Trump, or anybody in the Trump regime. This is not how you go about preventing drugs from coming into this country, if indeed there were drugs on that boat. As mentioned, you stop the boat, you search the boat. If there are drugs, you arrest the people on that boat. The idea that the United States military was ordered to attack that boat with 11 people on it in international waters without proving that they had any evidence of a crime is deeply disturbing and un-American, and is a trend, I'm afraid, that is only going to get worse. As far as I'm aware anyway, the punishment for trafficking drugs in America is not death, certainly not without benefit of a jury trial. President Maduro has accused the Trump regime of portraying him as a gang leader, falsely, in an attempt to drive him out of office. On Monday, Maduro told reporters he would, quote, constitutionally declare a republic in arms, unquote, if U.S. forces deployed to the Caribbean attacked his country. I am not entirely sure why Venezuela does not see this as an act of war. Venezuelan citizens were killed without any due process for reasons we cannot be sure about. This may be an attempt for Donald to show the world that he's a tough guy. I mean, even Fox was claiming that Donald single-handedly eviscerated the people on that boat. This may be an attempt to distract us from the Epstein scandal and the failing U.S. economy. But if this is a distraction, it is also a serious problem that must be addressed and cannot be forgotten, because this is the executive branch. This is the commander-in-chief of the United States military using the military in ways that are both illegal and unconstitutional and may well end up getting the United States into a conflict we should not be in. So what are voters making of all of the chaos being generated by the Trump regime? Well, here's some indication that Donald's hold over Hispanic and Latino voters in Texas may be losing ground. Elizabeth Findell of the Wall Street Journal reports that even though Republicans have made progress among this demographic in recent elections, the Hispanic vote is not a sure thing for Republicans in 2026 and beyond. In the Wall Street Journal, it was reported that, quote, many here expressed disappointment in Donald's mass deportation policy, saying they thought he was going to focus only on criminals, not hardworking, undocumented immigrants who have been in the country for years. Others say they didn't feel he was focusing enough on bringing down the cost of living. Most had not made up their minds about 2026, expressing a range of openness to backing Republicans, unquote. This development pokes holes in Donald's plan to redraw voting maps in Texas, which depends somewhat on maintaining support from Hispanics, although I'm sure Greg Abbott, the governor of Texas, will bend over backwards to make sure that the districts are drawn to such a degree that Republican victories are entirely assured. Maybe this shouldn't be a surprise, but it turns out some people who actually have been supporting Donald in the past are drawing a line, finding that some of his policies are too cruel and racist even for them, and there may indeed be consequences at the ballot box. These voters wanted secure borders, but Donald's deportations have crossed a line with many. And it isn't just the deportations, it's the way in which they have been carried out. So here's hoping that there are more people in the Republican Party, more people in Donald's base who decide that it just isn't worth it, that ruining the lives of people to prove a point just isn't worth it anymore. Maybe, just maybe, they will come to their senses and turn their backs on the fascism of the Trump regime. Please take a second and like and share this video. It'd be awesome if you could subscribe to the channel. If you're listening to us in podcast form, please follow us and give the show a 5-star rating, because it really does help other people find our content. Thanks.